Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is The Strangest Jobs in Tudor England. You get comfortable. Take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Strangest Jobs in Tudor England. Imagine waking before sunrise in Tudor England, when the streets are still quiet, and the air carries the cool smell of damp earth, wood smoke, and yesterday's rain. The world around you is beginning to stir. Somewhere nearby, a wooden door opens with a soft creak. A cart rolls slowly over uneven ground. You hear the distant sound of footsteps, followed by the low voices of people beginning another day. But as you walk through the waking streets, you notice something unusual. Not everyone is a farmer. Not everyone is a merchant, a soldier, a servant, or a craftsman. Tudor England had work for people whose occupations might seem surprisingly strange to us today. Some jobs existed because the royal court demanded them. Others grew from the complicated needs of wealthy households, busy towns, churches, markets, and ships. Some were practical occupations that simply disappeared as technology and society changed. A few were so closely connected with the habits of Tudor life that it is difficult to imagine them existing anywhere else. And so, tonight, we will walk quietly through that world. There will be no rush. We will follow narrow streets, enter great houses, pass through royal palaces, listen to the sounds of markets, and watch ordinary people carrying out work that has almost vanished from memory. Picture yourself moving through London during the reign of the Tudors. The buildings around you are mostly timber-framed. Their upper floors lean slightly over the street, sometimes making the lanes feel narrower than they really are. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, and after rain, it may be muddy. There are no electric lamps waiting to brighten the darkness. There are no engines humming in the distance. The light of evening will eventually come from candles, rushlights, lamps, and fires. The smell of the city is a mixture of many things. Wood smoke, bread, horse manure, ale, wet clothing, cooking meat, river water, and depending on where you are standing, smells that people today would find difficult to tolerate. Yet this is home to thousands of people. They know these streets. They know the sounds. They know the faces of neighbors and workers. And they know that every morning brings another day of work. For some people, that work is familiar. For others, it is wonderfully strange. One of the most interesting places to begin is the royal household. The Tudor monarch did not live alone. A king or queen traveled with a large household of servants, officers, attendants, cooks, musicians, messengers, guards, and specialists. The royal household was almost like a small, moving community. When the monarch traveled, many people had to travel too. Clothing needed to be prepared. Food had to be purchased and cooked. Rooms had to be cleaned. Horses needed care. Letters had to be carried. Furniture and household objects had to be transported. The royal household had its own systems, ranks, offices, and traditions. And within this complicated world were occupations that can sound almost unbelievable to modern ears. One of the most famous examples was the groom of the stool. The name itself sounds strange because the position was connected to the monarch's private toilet. The office developed into a position of considerable access to the king. The groom of the stool was responsible for assisting the monarch with personal needs connected to the privy, but the role could involve much more than the basic physical task suggested by its name. Because the servant had such intimate access to the king, the position could become one of trust. The person serving in the role might hear private conversations. He could become familiar with the king's routines. And in a court where access to the monarch was extremely valuable, closeness could bring influence. This tells us something important about Tudor society. We tend to divide jobs into categories: important work, unimportant work, prestigious work, embarrassing work. But Tudor society did not always draw those lines in the same way. A task that sounds humiliating to us could place someone remarkably close to the center of political power. Imagine standing inside a royal palace early in the morning. The stone walls are cool. A fire burns somewhere nearby. Servants move quietly through corridors. You might hear footsteps approaching before you see anyone. Behind one door sits the monarch. Outside, politics is waiting. Ambassadors are waiting. Courtiers are waiting. Letters are waiting. Yet the person closest to the king at that particular private moment may not be a nobleman. He may be a servant whose official responsibility sounds almost absurdly ordinary. This contrast between humble duties and extraordinary access appears again and again in Tudor life, and it becomes even more interesting when we move deeper into the royal household. Food was one of the great concerns of a Tudor court. A royal household required enormous quantities of provisions: bread, meat, fish, poultry, dairy products, vegetables, spices, wine, ale, and many other foods had to be obtained and prepared. The kitchens could be busy places. Fires burned for long periods. Pots simmered. Knives struck wooden boards. Servants carried dishes through passages and rooms. The smell of roasting meat could drift through the household. But the royal kitchen also required people with very specialized responsibilities. There were cooks and pastry makers, but there were also officers responsible for particular parts of food service. One particularly interesting occupation was the royal waferer. The waferer was associated with making wafers, thin baked foods that could be prepared from batter or dough. To modernize, making a wafer does not sound like an important royal profession. Yet within the elaborate organization of a great household, even small food items could have their own specialists. This was partly because royal service was organized around division of labor. A large household could support people whose entire working life focused on one narrow responsibility. The same principle appears elsewhere. There were people responsible for royal horses. Others cared for hunting equipment. Others worked with clothing. Others managed the royal wardrobe. Others handled candles and lighting. The palace was a world where thousands of small tasks had to fit together. And sometimes, the stranger the task sounds, the more it reveals about daily life. Consider candles. Today, you can turn on a light without thinking about it. In Tudor England, light was something that had to be produced, maintained, and paid for. Candles were valuable household items. Different materials produced different kinds of candles, and their quality could vary. Beeswax candles were particularly associated with churches and wealthy households because beeswax burned relatively cleanly and had a pleasant smell compared with some other materials. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, were more common for ordinary lighting. Imagine entering a Tudor room after sunset. The daylight has disappeared. The windows are dark rectangles against the night. A small flame trembles nearby. The light does not fill the room evenly. It creates pools of brightness and leaves corners in shadow. Someone has to make the candle. Someone has to trim its wick. Someone has to replace it when it burns down. Someone has to clean the holders. The simple act of seeing at night depends upon a chain of work, and that chain includes occupations that modern cities have made almost invisible. The same is true of clothing. Tudor clothing was not simply something purchased from a shop and forgotten. Clothing represented labor. Wool had to be produced. Fibers had to be prepared. Cloth had to be woven. It might be dyed. It might be cut. It might be sewn. Buttons, ribbons, laces, and other details had to be added. Clothing belonging to the wealthy could require many hours of skilled work. At court, people were surrounded by clothing specialists, tailors, embroiderers, wardrobe workers, laundry workers, and people responsible for maintaining the garments after they were made. A royal garment could be expensive enough that it was carefully repaired rather than simply discarded. Imagine a servant holding a piece of fine Tudor clothing close to a window. The fabric is heavy. The stitching is delicate. The colors may be rich. There may be embroidery along the edges. A small tear cannot simply be ignored. Someone must repair it. That person may never appear in a portrait. Their name may not survive in popular memory, but their hands helped maintain the appearance of the Tudor court. And that is one of the quiet truths of history. Great historical figures often depended upon ordinary workers whose names disappeared. Kings and queens appear in paintings. Servants often do not. Yet the servants kept the world functioning. Outside the palace, the same pattern continued. Towns were filled with specialized workers. Some occupations were controlled by guilds or regulated by local authorities. A person might spend years learning a craft. But not every occupation involved making something beautiful. Some existed because cities created problems that needed practical solutions. Take the night soil worker. The term refers to people who removed human waste from privies and cesspits, especially in towns where sanitation was a constant problem. The work was unpleasant. There was no modern sewage system carrying waste safely away from the city. Households had to deal with their own waste. Privies and cesspits could fill. When that happened, someone had to remove what had accumulated. Imagine walking through a town before sunrise. The streets are quiet. Most people are asleep. Then, somewhere in the darkness, workers are already beginning their tasks. They move carefully because the work is dirty and physically demanding. There is little glamour in it. But without such workers, urban life would become even more difficult. This is an important distinction when thinking about strange historical jobs. Some were strange because their names sound unusual. Some were strange because the work itself has disappeared. And some seem strange simply because modern society has hidden the problems they once solved. Tudor England had no modern waste management infrastructure, so people had to create their own solutions. Waste might be reused as manure in some circumstances. Other forms of refuse could be collected or removed. Household rubbish might end up in streets, yards, pits, or other places. The Tudor city was therefore not a clean, silent environment. It was busy, crowded, and constantly producing waste. People lived close together. Animals were part of everyday urban life. Horses pulled carts. Cattle could pass through streets. Dogs wandered. Markets brought food and people together. Rain could turn dirt into mud. And every day created another layer of refuse. The workers who dealt with these problems were not celebrated, yet their labor mattered. As the morning slowly arrives, the streets begin to change. A baker prepares bread. A butcher opens his shop. A brewer checks his vessels. A porter carries goods. A servant walks quickly toward a wealthy household. And somewhere beyond the noise, a worker begins a job that most people would rather never discuss. This was Tudor England. A society of great ceremony and ordinary necessity. A world where a person could serve a king, clean a cesspit, prepare candles, care for horses, wash clothing, carry messages, or perform a dozen other specialized tasks. And sometimes, the strangest occupations were hidden in plain sight. One such occupation was connected to the royal bedchamber. The royal bed was more than a place for sleeping. In a wealthy household, a bed could be an expensive object. The frame, mattress, curtains, blankets, sheets, and decorative textiles all required care. Beds could be heavy and complicated. Curtains helped create privacy and warmth. Mattresses could be filled with materials such as straw or other stuffing. Bedding had to be aired and cleaned. A royal household therefore required people who understood the care of beds and textiles. This may sound simple, but imagine the amount of work required when the household moves. The monarch could travel between residences. The royal household had to follow. Bedding, clothing, furniture, documents, kitchen equipment, and many other objects might have to be transported. A great household was not just a collection of people. It was a logistical machine, and every machine depends upon people whose work is rarely noticed. There were also servants whose work involved carrying messages. Before modern telecommunications, information moved at the speed of people and horses. A letter could take hours, days, or longer to travel depending on distance, weather, roads, and urgency. A messenger might leave a town with a letter sealed and protected. He would ride along roads that could be rough and muddy. Rain could slow the journey. Darkness could make travel dangerous. A tired horse might need to be replaced, and the message itself could be extremely important. But most messengers were not famous. They were simply the human connection between one place and another. Imagine being handed a sealed letter in the evening. You know only that it must reach someone far away. You place it safely inside your clothing or in a secure container. Then you step outside. The air is cold. The road ahead is dark. Behind you, the light of the town gradually disappears. You ride through the night. There is no telephone, no railway, no motor car, only the road, the horse, the darkness, and the message. The job may sound ordinary, but in a world without instant communication, it was essential. And the stranger occupations of Tudor England often become easier to understand when we remember one simple fact. People had to perform every task that modern technology now performs automatically. Someone had to provide light. Someone had to move waste. Someone had to carry information. Someone had to preserve food. Someone had to maintain clothing. Someone had to prepare beds. Someone had to care for animals. Someone had to keep the palace supplied. And someone had to perform the small, uncomfortable duties that allowed powerful people to live in comfort. The higher a household stood in society, the more invisible labor often surrounded it. At a royal palace, you might see magnificent halls, painted walls, rich fabrics, silver dishes, and carefully dressed courtiers. But behind those visible things were workers, people carrying wood, people washing linen, people cleaning rooms, people preparing meals, people feeding animals, people repairing objects, people counting supplies, people lighting fires, people extinguishing them, people opening shutters in the morning, people closing them at night. The Tudor world was held together by thousands of hands, and as evening returns, those hands do not stop immediately. Fires need tending, candles need replacing, animals need feeding, doors need securing. The final meals of the day are prepared. The household grows quieter. Perhaps somewhere in the distance you hear a bell. The sound moves gently across the town. One day is ending. But for some workers, the night is only beginning, because darkness created another unusual occupation: watchmen. In towns and cities, people were employed to keep watch, especially during the night. Their duties could include watching for fires, disturbances, and other dangers. Fire was a serious threat in densely built towns. Many buildings were made largely from timber. Cooking depended on open flames. Candles and lamps provided artificial light. A small accident could become a much larger problem, so people needed to remain awake while others slept. Imagine walking through a Tudor street after midnight. The windows are dark. The houses are silent. The stones beneath your feet are damp. Most people are behind closed doors. But somewhere nearby, a watchman is awake. He listens. He watches. His job is not to make history. His job is simply to notice when something is wrong. A distant shout, a suspicious movement, the smell of smoke, a door left open, a disturbance in the street. His work is quiet because success often means that nothing happens. And perhaps that is why these workers are so easily forgotten. When everything goes well, nobody notices them. When danger appears, they suddenly become important. The same can be said of many Tudor occupations. The most valuable workers were often those whose absence would immediately create a problem. A royal household without cooks could not feed itself. A town without waste workers would become increasingly unhealthy. A palace without messengers would struggle to communicate. A household without cleaners would quickly become unpleasant. A stable without grooms would lose control of its horses. A city without watchmen would have fewer people awake to notice danger. The Tudor world may feel distant now, but beneath the unfamiliar clothing, unfamiliar language, and vanished customs, there is something very familiar: People still woke each morning. They still worried about money. They still wanted warm food. They still needed clean clothes. They still cared for children. They still complained about difficult work. They still looked forward to rest. And when the day finally became quiet, they still wanted a safe place to sleep. So, as the final sounds of the Tudor town fade into the darkness, imagine yourself standing beneath the overhanging timber houses. The night air is cool. A candle glows behind a small window. A horse shifts quietly in a nearby stable. Somewhere, a door closes. The watchman continues his slow walk, and inside the royal household, servants are finishing the work that most people will never see. Tomorrow, the same world will wake again. The strange jobs will return with it, and among them are occupations even more unusual than the ones we have encountered tonight. There were people whose entire working lives revolved around royal clothing. People who handled the king's hunting animals. People who cared for exotic creatures brought to England from distant lands. People whose work was connected with royal entertainment. People who maintained objects that existed only because the court had developed an appetite for luxury. And as we move deeper into Tudor England, we will begin to see how these unusual occupations were connected not only to work, but to power, status, comfort, fear, and quiet routines of everyday life. For now, though, the palace is becoming still. The fires settle into glowing embers. The candles burn lower. The streets grow darker. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, another Tudor worker prepares for the long night ahead. You find yourself walking slowly through the sleeping town. There is nothing hurried here, only the soft rhythm of footsteps, the faint sound of wind against wooden walls, and the distant murmur of a world that never becomes completely silent. The next morning is already waiting. And with it comes another strange Tudor occupation. By the time the first pale light begins to enter the sky, the Tudor household is already waking. You find yourself standing near a great house, where the quiet of the night is slowly giving way to the sounds of another working day. A door opens. Someone carries a bucket across a courtyard. A horse stamps its foot against the stable floor. From a kitchen chimney, a thin line of smoke rises into the cool morning air. Nothing about the scene seems unusual at first. But look a little closer, and you begin to notice how many people are already working. The Tudor household depended upon an enormous amount of labor that was almost invisible to the people enjoying its comforts. And some of those workers had responsibilities that would sound very strange today. One of the most interesting areas was the royal wardrobe. Clothing at the Tudor court was not simply about keeping warm. It could communicate wealth, rank, authority, and position. The monarch's clothing was part of the language of the court. Fine fabrics could be expensive. Furs, silks, velvet, embroidery, and precious decorations could all indicate status. Clothing therefore needed careful management. A royal wardrobe was not simply a cupboard filled with dresses and coats. It was an organized department. Garments had to be stored. They had to be repaired. They had to be prepared for particular occasions. They had to be accounted for, and they had to be protected from damage. Imagine opening a storage room in a Tudor palace. The room is dim. The air smells faintly of fabric, wood, and perhaps herbs used to discourage insects. Clothes hang or rest carefully inside. Some garments are plain by royal standards. Others are richly decorated. A small mistake could damage something valuable. A candle placed too close could scorch fabric. Dampness could cause problems. Insects could feed on natural fibers. A garment that had taken many hours to produce could not simply be replaced whenever it became dirty or worn. Someone had to care for it. This gave rise to many specialized workers. Tailors repaired and altered garments. Embroiderers added decorative work. Cloth workers handled materials. Wardrobe officials organized the larger system. And laundresses performed the difficult work of washing linen and other washable textiles. Laundry in Tudor England was not a simple afternoon activity. There were no washing machines, no hot water taps, no modern detergents. Water had to be obtained. Clothing had to be carried. Fires had to be maintained when hot water was needed. Soap could be made from animal fats and alkaline substances. Cloth could be scrubbed, beaten, rinsed, and dried. It was physical labor. Imagine a large pile of linen waiting to be washed. The fabric is heavy when wet. Your hands become cold. Your back begins to ache. The water changes color as dirt leaves the cloth. There is no machine to finish the task while you rest. The work continues until the fabric is clean enough, and then comes the drying. In good weather, cloth can be spread outside. In poor weather, everything becomes more difficult. The Tudor household therefore depended upon weather in ways that modern households rarely experience. Rain could delay laundry. Cold could make water unpleasant to work with. Strong sunlight could help drying, but might damage some materials. A household's daily routine was shaped by the natural world. This becomes especially clear when we look at one of the strangest and most overlooked occupations of the period, the laundress. The word may sound ordinary, but the work could be exhausting. In wealthy households, enormous amounts of linen were used: sheets, shirts, tablecloths, napkins, underclothing, other household textiles. Keeping these things clean required a continuous cycle of washing. The people who performed this work were essential to maintaining the appearance and comfort of the household. Yet they rarely received the attention given to the people wearing the clean clothing. History often remembers the person who wore the beautiful garment. It forgets the person who washed it. And this pattern continues throughout the Tudor world. The visible part of life belongs to the wealthy. The invisible part belongs to workers. Now imagine leaving the wardrobe and walking toward the stables. The smell changes immediately. You notice hay, leather, horse sweat, wet earth. The sound of hooves comes from inside. The Tudor elite depended heavily on horses. Horses were used for travel, hunting, warfare, transportation, and ceremony. A royal stable could therefore be a busy and highly organized place. There were grooms and other stable workers whose duties involved feeding, grooming, cleaning, and caring for the animals. But the royal relationship with animals could become much stranger than simply keeping horses. The Tudor court sometimes possessed animals that were unusual for England. Exotic animals could arrive as gifts or through diplomatic connections. One of the most famous examples is the royal menagerie. A menagerie was a collection of animals kept for display and interest. The Tower of London became associated with a royal menagerie containing animals that would have seemed extraordinary to most English people. Lions were among them. So were other animals from distant regions. Imagine living in Tudor London and hearing that the king possesses a lion. For most people, this would have been almost impossible to imagine. They knew domestic animals. They knew horses, cows, sheep, pigs, dogs, and cats. They knew birds. But a lion was something from another world. It belonged to distant lands, ancient stories, religious imagery, and royal symbolism. To see one alive would have been extraordinary. And yet someone had to care for it. Someone had to feed it. Someone had to clean its enclosure. Someone had to understand its behavior. Someone had to approach it carefully. The keeper of such an animal was performing a job that was both practical and unusual. The work was not necessarily glamorous. An exotic animal still had to be fed. Its enclosure still had to be maintained. Its health still had to be observed. And its keeper still had to deal with the smell, waste, and physical demands that came with caring for a large animal. Picture yourself standing near the tower. The stone walls are cool beneath your hand. Inside one enclosure, an animal moves slowly. You hear its breathing. You notice the smell of meat. You realize that somewhere nearby, a person is responsible for making sure this creature survives. That person may have learned through experience rather than modern zoological science. There were no modern veterinary hospitals, no laboratory tests, no detailed understanding of animal behavior as we have today. Care depended heavily on observation, practical knowledge, and tradition. The keeper watched. He noticed changes. He learned the animal's habits. He understood when it was hungry or restless. The job was unusual because the animal itself was unusual. But the underlying responsibility was very familiar. Someone had to care for a living creature that depended entirely upon human attention. And this brings us naturally to another group of Tudor workers, those who cared for animals used for hunting. Hunting was an important activity for the nobility. It was recreation, but it was also connected with status, training, and displays of wealth. Horses and hounds were particularly important. A noble household could maintain a large collection of hunting dogs. These animals needed food, exercise, grooming, training, and medical care. The people responsible for them were specialists. Among the best known were huntsmen and kennel workers. Their daily lives were closely connected with animals. Imagine waking before the rest of the household. The morning air is cold. Mist hangs over the fields. The dogs are already restless. You hear them moving inside the kennels. Their breathing is quick. Their claws scrape against the floor. You know their individual personalities. One is impatient. Another is calm. Another becomes excited whenever it smells something unfamiliar. Your work is to prepare them. The nobleman who eventually rides out may receive the attention, but the animals cannot be prepared without the workers. And the same is true for falconry. Falcons and other birds of prey were highly valued by the Tudor elite. Keeping a trained hunting bird required specialist knowledge. A falconer had to feed the bird correctly. The bird's condition mattered. Its feathers mattered. Its behavior mattered. Training required patience. The relationship between falconer and bird could be remarkably close. Imagine holding a falcon on your gloved hand. The bird's talons rest against the leather. Its feathers move slightly in the morning breeze. Its head turns. Its eyes watch the landscape. You stand quietly. The bird does not understand your world in the way you do. But through training and repeated interaction, the two of you have developed a working relationship. This was not simply a matter of owning an animal. The bird was part of a specialized system. The falconer had to understand when to feed it, when to exercise it, and how to maintain its condition. It was a demanding occupation. And for the Tudor elite, it could be a prestigious one. Yet there were other animal-related jobs that were far less glamorous. A farrier, for example, worked with horses' hooves. The health of a horse depended heavily upon its feet. A horse with damaged or poorly maintained hooves could become difficult to use. Farriers therefore provided a practical service that was important for transport, agriculture, warfare, and elite recreation. The sound of a hammer striking metal could echo through a courtyard. The smell of hot iron might mix with horse sweat and smoke. The work required strength and skill. The farrier had to handle an animal capable of kicking with great force. There was nothing decorative about the occupation. It was simply necessary. And this is where the strange occupations of Tudor England begin to reveal a larger pattern. A job does not have to sound strange because the work itself is bizarre. Sometimes a job becomes strange because the world that created it has disappeared. The farrier still exists, but many people today rarely see one. The laundress existed everywhere, but modern machines have transformed the task. The messenger existed because communication depended upon physical travel. The royal animal keeper existed because rulers collected animals from distant lands. The watchman existed because towns needed people awake through the night. The occupation made sense within its own time. This is an important lesson when traveling through history. We should not judge an old occupation only by whether it seems useful to us now. Instead, we can ask what problem it solved. What need created it? What kind of society allowed it to exist? And what changed when the occupation disappeared? Now let us return to the royal court. The Tudor monarchs were surrounded by ceremony. Meals could be formal. Public appearances could be carefully controlled. Clothing could carry political meaning. Music, hunting, religious observance, and court entertainment all formed part of royal life. This created another group of workers. Musicians. Royal households employed musicians for ceremonies, celebrations, dancing, worship, and entertainment. Some were singers. Others played instruments. There were specialists in different forms of music. A musician's job might seem pleasant compared with cleaning a cesspit or washing heavy linen. But professional music required skill and discipline. A musician could spend years learning. Imagine a quiet room inside a palace. Someone tunes an instrument. A string vibrates softly. Another musician tests a note. Outside, servants are carrying supplies. Inside, music begins. For a few moments, the ordinary noise of work seems to disappear. Music could create atmosphere. It could accompany a feast. It could mark a ceremony. It could provide entertainment. But the musicians were workers too. They had schedules. They had employers. They had expectations. and like everyone else, they depended upon the household that paid them. The same could be said of court entertainers. Tudor courts employed jesters and other performers. The court jester is often imagined as someone who simply told jokes. The reality was more complicated. Court fools could entertain through humor, storytelling, performance, and unusual behavior. Some had physical or intellectual disabilities, while others were professional entertainers. Their social position could be unusual. They were servants, but their role allowed them to speak or behave in ways that other servants could not. A joke could sometimes say something that would be dangerous if spoken directly. The jester could stand near powerful people and provide amusement, but behind the entertainment was still employment. A person had to perform. The court expected entertainment. The audience could be unpredictable. And the position depended upon the favor of those in power. Imagine a feast at a Tudor palace. Candles flicker across polished surfaces. Food is carried into the room. People talk quietly. Music fills the background. Then the entertainer appears. The room changes. People laugh. For a moment, the burdens of politics and ceremony become lighter. But when the laughter ends, the entertainer returns to being a worker. The contrast is gentle but important. The Tudor court could be magnificent, yet everyone inside it was part of a system of labor. Even those who seemed to live in luxury depended upon people performing countless tasks. And some of those tasks were extraordinarily intimate. Consider the king's barber. Today, a barber might cut hair, trim a beard, and perhaps offer a conversation while you sit in a chair. In Tudor England, the barber's role could overlap with other forms of bodily care. Barber surgeons were historically associated with certain minor surgical procedures, bloodletting, and other practical treatments. The separation between medical professions was not the same as it is today. A barber surgeon could therefore perform work that modern people would associate with very different occupations. Imagine entering a small shop. The room smells of soap, metal, and perhaps herbs. Tools lie nearby. A person waits for treatment. The practitioner prepares carefully. There is no modern anesthesia, no modern antiseptic system, no antibiotics. Medical work could therefore be uncomfortable and risky. Bloodletting, for example, was widely practiced according to medical beliefs of the time. It was based on the idea that health depended upon a balance of bodily fluids, often described through the traditional theory of humors. From a modern medical perspective, many of these ideas were incorrect, but within Tudor medicine, they were part of established practice. The people performing such work were not necessarily foolish. They were working with the knowledge available to them. They observed symptoms. They followed inherited theories. They learned through apprenticeship and experience. History becomes easier to understand when we remember that people in the past did not know what we know now. They lived inside different systems of knowledge, and every occupation made sense within those systems. This was especially true for another unusual profession, the apothecary. An apothecary prepared and sold medicines. Their shops could contain plants, powders, oils, syrups, spices, and other substances used in remedies. The smell inside such a shop might have been surprisingly rich. Dried herbs, roots, resins, spices, alcohol-based preparations. The apothecary measured ingredients and prepared compounds according to the medical traditions of the time. Some remedies may have been useful, others were ineffective. Some could even be dangerous. But the occupation itself was important because people needed treatment. Illness was a constant part of life. A person could become sick suddenly. An injury could happen at work. A child could develop a fever. An infection could become serious. Without modern medicine, people relied on a mixture of professional practitioners, household remedies, religious practices, and traditional knowledge. The apothecary occupied one part of this world. And as night falls again over Tudor England, the shop begins to quiet. The shutters close, the bottles are put away. The final customer leaves. The apothecary cleans the workbench. Outside, the street becomes darker. Somewhere nearby, a church bell marks the hour. The town is settling. But the world of unusual Tudor work is far from exhausted. There are still occupations connected with death. There are people who prepared bodies, people who dug graves, people who made coffins, people who rang bells for funerals, people who helped organize the ceremonies surrounding death. And there were workers whose jobs were connected with punishment and the law. The executioner is perhaps one of the most famous examples. The executioner performed sentences imposed by authorities. The work carried a heavy social stigma. People could fear the person who performed executions. The occupation was necessary to the legal system, but could leave the worker socially isolated. Imagine a town where everyone knows who the executioner is. You see him walking through the market. People recognize him. Some move aside. Some stare. His work is public, but his social position is uncomfortable. This is another strange feature of historical occupations. A society can require a person to perform a task while simultaneously treating that person as an outsider. The executioner could therefore occupy a difficult position. Yet the work was part of the justice system of the time. Punishments in Tudor England could be severe. Execution, corporal punishment, imprisonment, fines, and public humiliation were all used in different circumstances. The law was visible. Punishment could become a public event. Crowds might gather. But behind the spectacle was a worker performing an assigned duty. The executioner did not create the law. He carried out the sentence. And once the work was finished, the town returned to ordinary life. The market reopened. People bought food. Children played. Carts moved through the streets. The world continued. That contrast between ordinary life and extraordinary work is one of the most fascinating parts of Tudor history. A person could spend the morning selling bread. The afternoon might be spent watching a public punishment. The evening could bring music, prayer, food, and conversation. Life contained many different worlds at once. And as we move onward, another group of unusual workers waits quietly in the background. They worked with the most important material in Tudor society: food. Not merely cooks, but people whose occupations involved preserving, transporting, measuring, inspecting, and preparing what people ate. Because food could not simply appear on a table, it had to travel. Fish had to be brought inland. Meat had to be butchered. Grain had to be milled. Beer had to be brewed. Bread had to be baked. Salt could be used to preserve food. Spices were valuable. Some foods were seasonal, others could be stored. Every meal depended upon a chain of workers. Imagine a Tudor kitchen just before supper. The room is warm from the fires. Steam rises from a pot. Someone carries bread across the floor. A cook checks a dish. A servant brings a jug. Another worker cleans a surface. The air smells of smoke, onions, meat, herbs, and baked grain. Nothing about the scene is silent. Yet there is rhythm in it. Everyone knows what must happen next. The food must be ready. The table must be prepared. The household must be fed. And once the meal is finished, another group of workers begins cleaning everything. The work continues, always quietly, always in the background, until eventually the palace grows still again. The final candles burn low. The corridors become empty. The servants who have been working since before sunrise finally have a chance to rest. Outside, the wind moves gently through the dark streets. A horse shifts in the stable. A dog settles down. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, another worker begins a night shift. The Tudor world never truly sleeps. There is always someone awake, someone carrying, someone cleaning, someone watching, someone repairing, someone waiting. And tomorrow, we will follow more of these forgotten workers. We will enter the world of royal hunting, strange court ceremonies, unusual forms of entertainment, dangerous trades, and occupations created by the very specific habits of Tudor society. Because the stranger we look, the clearer it becomes that Tudor England was not simply a world of kings and queens. It was a world built by workers, thousands of them, most unnamed, most forgotten, but each one performing a small task that helped the great machine of Tudor life continue moving. And as the night settles over the old town, you find yourself walking slowly home. The streets are damp. The air is cool. A faint smell of wood smoke remains above the rooftops. Behind one shuttered window, a candle is still burning. Perhaps someone is reading. Perhaps someone is praying. Perhaps a servant is finishing one final task before sleep. The flame trembles gently. Then, little by little, it grows smaller. And the Tudor night becomes quiet again. The night passes slowly over Tudor England. By the time the first gray light touches the rooftops, the streets are beginning to wake again. You find yourself walking beside a stone wall, listening to the soft sounds of morning. A cart creaks somewhere ahead. A door opens. A rooster calls from behind a house. The smell of smoke drifts through the cool air. Another day has begun. And with it comes another collection of people whose occupations were essential to Tudor life, even when their work might seem strange to us. Some worked for the king. Some worked for the church. Some worked in markets. Some worked in houses so wealthy that they employed dozens of servants. Others worked alone, carrying a trade from one village to another. The Tudor world was full of specialized knowledge. Much of it has now disappeared. One particularly interesting occupation belonged to people who worked with royal clothing and appearance. The royal barber could be much more than a person who trimmed hair. Hair, beards, and personal appearance mattered at court. A monarch's appearance was part of public presentation. Portraits, ceremonies, audiences, and official occasions all required careful preparation. Imagine a quiet room in a royal residence. The curtains are partly open. Morning light enters through the window. A basin of water sits nearby. There are combs, scissors, razors, cloths, and other tools. The barber prepares carefully. The monarch sits. A few small movements of the hand change the appearance of the face. In an age before modern mirrors were common in every household, personal grooming required experience and attention. A razor was a serious tool. A small mistake could cause a cut. The work therefore demanded steady hands, and the barber often belonged to a wider world of personal service. This reminds us that the Tudor court was a place where private life and public life were closely connected. The king could not simply disappear into a private modern-style bathroom and prepare himself alone. Many aspects of royal life required assistance. Clothing, bathing, grooming, food, travel, sleeping, communication. Even the preparation of a royal body for public appearance could involve several workers. This created jobs that would later disappear as households became more private and technology changed daily life. But there was another occupation at court that seems almost impossibly specialized. The person responsible for the royal wardrobe did not simply manage clothing. The wardrobe could contain valuable fabrics and garments that needed to be carefully recorded. A piece of clothing might be ordered for a specific ceremony. Another might be altered. Another might be given away. Another might be repaired. The records of royal households sometimes reveal how carefully such possessions were managed. The clothing of powerful people represented money. Fabric was expensive. Labor was expensive. Decorative work took time. A garment might pass through several skilled hands before it reached its wearer. Imagine a tailor working beside a window. The cloth lies across a wooden table. A needle moves slowly through the fabric. The room is quiet, except for the faint sound of thread being pulled. There is no electric sewing machine. Every stitch depends upon a human hand. The tailor measures, cuts, pins, sews, unpicks mistakes, and begins again. The final garment may look effortless, but behind that appearance are hours of patient work. This is especially true of embroidery. Embroiderers could produce highly detailed decorative patterns using colored threads. Gold and silver threads could be used in elite clothing and furnishings. Such work required patience. A single small section could take considerable time. The worker had to maintain consistency. The design had to remain balanced. The thread had to be handled carefully. Imagine looking closely at a Tudor embroidered sleeve. From a distance, it seems like decoration. Up close, you can see the individual stitches. Each one was placed by hand. There is something peaceful about imagining that work, a person sitting quietly for hours. The fabric held steady, the needle passing through, the pattern gradually appearing. Outside, the world continues. Carts move through the street. People argue in the market. Horses pass. Church bells sound. But inside the workshop, time moves according to the rhythm of the needle. This kind of skilled work was common across Tudor England, and it reminds us that strange jobs were not always strange because they were unpleasant. Some were simply highly specialized. Another example can be found in the world of parchment. Before modern paper became widely available, parchment and vellum were important writing materials. Parchment was made from animal skin. Producing it required several stages of difficult preparation. The skin had to be cleaned. Hair and unwanted material had to be removed. It was treated and stretched. The surface was scraped and prepared until it could receive ink. The work could be dirty and physically demanding. The smell of animal skin would have been noticeable. The process required water, tools, and careful handling. Imagine a worker stretching a hide across a frame. The material is damp. The air is cool. A scraping tool moves across the surface. The worker removes one layer after another. The final sheet must be smooth enough for writing. This occupation belonged to a world where documents were valuable physical objects. A royal order was not simply a digital file. A legal agreement was not stored on a computer. A religious manuscript could take months or years to produce. The physical material mattered. The people who prepared it, therefore, played an important role in the communication of Tudor society. Another occupation existed at the other end of the writing process: the scribe. A skilled scribe could produce documents carefully and efficiently. Some worked for churches, some worked for legal offices, some worked in royal or noble households. Their work required concentration. Imagine sitting at a wooden desk. A quill rests between your fingers. A small container of ink sits nearby. The room is quiet. You dip the quill. Remove the excess ink. Then begin writing. The sound is delicate. The quill scratches softly across the parchment. There is no backspace, no easy correction. A mistake can ruin a line. A longer mistake may require the page to be repaired or rewritten. The scribe therefore works slowly. The letters must be clear. The spacing must be controlled. The document must look respectable. In the quiet room, writing becomes almost a form of craftsmanship. And the more we follow these occupations, the more we discover that Tudor England was filled with people whose work depended upon patience. This was especially true for those working with clocks. Mechanical clocks existed in Tudor England, although they were very different from modern clocks. Public clocks could be important features of towns and institutions. They allowed people to organize activities around shared signals. But mechanical clocks required maintenance. A clockmaker or specialist had to understand gears, weights, springs, and moving mechanisms. The occupation demanded technical knowledge. Imagine entering a small workshop. The room smells of metal and oil. Tiny pieces lie across a wooden surface. Gears are arranged carefully. A tool rests beside them. The clockmaker examines a mechanism. One wheel is not moving correctly. A small adjustment is made. The mechanism begins to turn. Tick, pause, tick, pause. The sound is gentle. But behind it is a complicated system of human invention. Mechanical timekeeping was still a relatively specialized technology. And for many ordinary people, the natural world remained more important for measuring the day. Sunrise, sunset, church bells, meal times, work routines. The clock did not yet dominate every minute of life. This is another difference between Tudor England and the modern world. Today, time follows us everywhere. On a phone, on a computer, on a wall, on a vehicle. In a Tudor town, time was often experienced through larger rhythms: the rising sun, the church bell, the changing light, the beginning and ending of work. The seasons, the agricultural year. And yet, inside a clockmaker's workshop, another kind of time was quietly being constructed. Precise mechanical time. This brings us naturally to church workers. Religion shaped much of Tudor life, but the Tudor religious world was not stable. The reigns of Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I brought major changes to religious practice. Churches were altered. Religious objects were removed or restored. Services changed. People had to adapt to new official expectations. And behind these enormous changes were ordinary workers, bell ringers, sextons, clergy, church wardens, cleaners, people responsible for maintaining church buildings. The sexton is particularly interesting. The role could include caring for the church building, preparing the church for services, managing practical tasks, and sometimes maintaining the churchyard. The work was not glamorous, but it was necessary. Imagine arriving at a church before the congregation. The building is cold. The stone floor holds the chill of the night. Dust rests in quiet corners. The sexton prepares the space. Perhaps a bell needs attention. Perhaps a door must be opened. Perhaps candles or other materials must be prepared. The building must be ready. People will arrive soon, and when they do, they may never think about the person who prepared everything. This was common in Tudor England. The work that made public life possible was often invisible once it was finished. A clean room looks as though it simply became clean. A prepared church looks as though it simply became ready. A warm fire looks as though it simply appeared. But someone did the work, and someone usually had to do it again tomorrow. Church bell ringing was another specialized activity. Bells could mark time. They could call people to worship. They could announce important events. They could signal danger. They could be heard across a large area. Imagine standing beneath a church tower. The air is still. Then the bell begins. The sound rolls across the rooftops. It enters streets. But it supported almost every part of Tudor life. A door needed hinges. A horse needed shoes. A cart needed metal fittings. A building needed nails. A farmer needed tools. A soldier needed equipment. The blacksmith's work therefore connected many different worlds. And there were workers whose jobs existed because horses were so important. The ostler. An ostler cared for horses, especially at inns or other establishments where travelers arrived. The job could involve feeding, grooming, watering, and looking after the animals. At an inn, the traveler might think mostly about food and a bed. But behind the inn was another world. The horses needed attention. A tired animal had to be fed. Water had to be carried. Stalls had to be cleaned. Harnesses had to be checked. The traveler could sleep peacefully because someone else remained responsible for the animal. Picture yourself arriving at an inn near sunset. The road behind you is muddy. Your horse is tired. You hear voices from the inn. A fire burns inside. The smell of cooked food drifts through the doorway. But before you can settle down, the horse must be cared for. An ostler takes the animal. You hand over the reins. The horse disappears toward the stable. Only then can your journey truly pause. The ostler may spend much of the evening working while guests sit indoors. Again, The comfortable experience of one person depends upon the labor of another. This was especially true for travelers. Tudor roads could be difficult. Travel was slower. Inns provided food, drink, shelter, and stable facilities. But they also required workers, cooks, servants, cleaners, porters, ostlers, people who carried water, people who prepared beds, people who cleaned dishes. A busy inn could be a small world of its own, and some inns were not peaceful places. Travelers arrived at different hours. Animals made noise. People drank. Arguments could happen. Merchants discussed business. Messengers arrived with news. Strangers slept under the same roof. The workers had to keep the place functioning. Imagine the inn after midnight. The dining room has become quieter. The fire is burning lower. Most guests are asleep, but the stable remains active. A horse needs water. Another needs attention. Someone moves through the yard. The wooden boards creak. The night air smells of hay and damp earth. The ostler continues working. The occupation may seem ordinary, but it was part of the infrastructure of travel. Without people like this, long-distance journeys would have been much harder. And Tudor England was becoming increasingly connected. Goods moved between towns, letters traveled, merchants traveled, officials traveled, members of the royal household traveled. The roads were busy enough to create entire occupations around movement. One such occupation was the porter. Porters carried goods for other people. In markets and towns, they might move heavy loads from one location to another. The work required strength. A porter could carry sacks, boxes, barrels, baskets, or other goods. Imagine standing beside a busy market. A merchant has arrived. His goods need to be moved. The porter lifts the load. The weight settles against his body. He begins walking. The distance may not be great, but the load is heavy. He reaches the destination. The goods are placed down. Then he returns for another load. The job is repetitive. But without it, markets would slow down. Goods do not move themselves. The Tudor economy depended upon human bodies carrying enormous amounts of material. This is one of the easiest things to forget when looking at the past. We see a marketplace. We imagine the goods simply being there. But every object had a journey. The grain was grown somewhere. It was harvested, transported, stored, milled, transported again, baked, sold, carried home. The loaf on the table was the final result of many people's labor. The same was true for clothing. The same was true for candles. The same was true for wine. The same was true for books. Everything had a history before it reached the person using it. And some workers existed specifically to inspect or regulate those goods. Markets were not completely free from rules. Weights and measures mattered. Food quality mattered. Prices could be regulated in certain circumstances. Local authorities could enforce standards. People could be punished for dishonest practices. This created another kind of occupation. Officials and inspectors responsible for enforcing rules. Some were connected with guilds. Others worked for local authorities. Their duties might include checking weights, measures, goods, or market practices. Imagine a market scale. A merchant places an object upon it. An official watches. The measurement must be correct. A small difference could mean a customer receiving less than they paid for. In a society without modern packaging standards, measurement was extremely important. A dishonest merchant could take advantage of uncertainty. Authorities therefore had reasons to regulate trade. Again, the occupation may not sound strange, but the systems surrounding it were very different. There was no barcode, no electronic scale, no printed nutritional label, no digital receipt. Trust depended partly on people, and where trust was uncertain, officials stepped in. As the day grows warmer, the market becomes louder. You hear bargaining. You smell bread, fish, spices, smoke, fresh vegetables. Perhaps the sharp smell of vinegar. People move between stalls. Animals pass through. Children follow adults. A messenger pushes through the crowd. A porter carries a heavy load. And somewhere nearby, a person performs one of the most unpleasant jobs in the entire town. The slaughterhouse worker. Animals had to be killed and butchered for meat. Butchery was skilled work. A butcher needed to understand the animal's body. The work required knives, strength, and experience. It was also messy. Blood, fat, bone, heat, the smell of meat. In a modern supermarket, the process is mostly hidden from customers. In Tudor towns, people could live much closer to the process. The butcher's work was part of everyday life. Imagine entering the market early. The day's meat has already been prepared. A butcher's stall is active. Customers approach. The worker cuts pieces according to their needs. The knife moves quickly. The conversation remains ordinary. People discuss price. They discuss quality. They decide what they can afford. The work is not presented as shocking. It is simply part of obtaining food. This is another useful reminder. What seems strange to us may have been completely normal to them, and what seems normal to us might have appeared astonishing to a Tudor person. Imagine showing a Tudor merchant a modern supermarket, rows of packaged food, cold storage, plastic containers, electric lights, self-service. He might find the entire experience bewildering. The strange jobs of Tudor England therefore teach us something about ourselves as well. Occupations change because society changes, technology changes, needs change, values change. And when those things change, entire categories of work can disappear. By late afternoon, the market begins to quiet. Some stalls close, unsold goods are packed away. The streets become easier to cross. Shadows lengthen across the buildings. A church bell sounds in the distance. The workers begin preparing for evening. But some people are only beginning their most important tasks. Those responsible for fires. Those responsible for security. Those working in inns. Those tending animals. Those preparing food. Those maintaining the royal household. Night does not mean the end of work. It simply changes the kind of work being done. And somewhere inside a great house, another occupation is waiting. The firekeeper. In a world where warmth depended upon fire, someone had to make sure fires did not die. A large household might have many hearths, kitchens, bedrooms, great halls, workrooms. Each fire required fuel. Wood had to be collected or purchased. Coal was used in some regions and circumstances. The fire had to be lit. It had to be maintained. Ash had to be removed. Too little fire meant cold. Too much fire could be dangerous. Imagine waking during a cold Tudor night. The room is dark. The fire has fallen low. The air feels cold against your face. Someone must wake and tend it. A few pieces of fuel are added. The embers glow. Then a small flame appears. Warmth slowly returns. It is easy to overlook fire when we have central heating. But for Tudor people, fire was one of the foundations of daily comfort. And so the person tending it performed an important job. Quietly, repeatedly, often without recognition. As the night deepens, the Tudor household settles. The palace corridors become dark. The kitchen is quieter. The animals are resting. The watchmen remain outside. The firekeeper checks the hearth one more time. A final piece of wood is placed carefully. The flame moves gently. For a moment, the whole house seems to breathe. Then the worker steps away. Tomorrow the fire will need tending again, and there will be other strange occupations waiting beyond the walls. People whose jobs were connected with royal ceremonies. People who prepared special foods. People who worked with perfume and cosmetics. People who cared for royal gardens. People who managed water. People who maintained the physical objects of court life. And perhaps most interesting of all, people whose occupations existed because the Tudor court had developed habits and traditions that would seem completely unfamiliar to us. The night is quiet now. You walk slowly through an empty courtyard. The stones beneath your feet are cool. A little wind passes between the buildings. You hear a horse breathing inside the stable. Somewhere far away, a bell marks the hour, and behind a closed door, a worker is still awake. Not a king, not a nobleman, not a famous person, just a worker. Someone whose name history may never remember, but someone whose hands helped keep Tudor England alive. And as you continue walking into the darkness, the next part of our journey is already waiting beyond the palace gates. The darkness slowly gives way to another morning. A faint gray light settles over the rooftops, and the streets begin their familiar awakening. You find yourself beside a Tudor palace once more. The stone walls are cool beneath the morning air. A few birds call from somewhere beyond the courtyard. Inside, servants are already moving. Footsteps pass across wooden floors. A fire is being stirred. A door opens, then closes softly. The palace seems to wake in layers. First the workers, then the household, then the people who will eventually fill the great rooms. And among those workers are people whose occupations existed because Tudor society had developed a remarkable taste for ceremony, comfort, display, and tradition. One of the most unusual areas was the royal garden. Today, a garden can be maintained with powered tools, automatic watering systems, fertilizers, and carefully engineered equipment. A Tudor garden depended much more directly on human hands. Gardeners prepared soil. They planted flowers. They trimmed trees. They maintained paths. They cared for herbs. They grew vegetables and fruit. In wealthy households, gardens could also be places of display. The garden was not only useful, it could demonstrate wealth and refinement. Imagine walking through a Tudor garden early in the morning. The grass is wet. Tiny drops of water cling to leaves. The air smells of damp soil and herbs. A gardener is already at work. He kneels beside a bed of plants. His hands are dark with earth. There is no electric mower in the distance. No automatic sprinkler suddenly begins spraying. The work is quiet and physical. A plant must be trimmed by hand. A path must be cleared. A wall must be repaired. A tree must be watched. The gardener learns the rhythm of the seasons. He knows when to plant, when to prune, when to harvest, when frost may become a problem. This knowledge is practical. It comes from observation and experience. And for a royal garden, the work could become much more specialized. Certain gardens included carefully arranged plants, decorative features, orchards, and spaces for leisure. Some wealthy households cultivated plants that were valuable or unusual. Herbs were especially important. They could be used in cooking. Some were used in household remedies. Others were valued simply for their scent or appearance. The gardener therefore lived between several worlds: food, medicine, beauty, and status. But there was another worker whose job was connected with gardens and water, the person responsible for maintaining fountains, ponds, and water features. Water was not always easy to move. Gravity was important. Pipes and channels had to be maintained. Wells had to be managed. Fountains required engineering. Imagine a Tudor palace on a warm summer afternoon. The garden is bright. People walk slowly beneath trees. A fountain sends water upward and then downward again. The sound is gentle. Visitors may simply enjoy the effect. But someone had to make it possible. Someone had to maintain the mechanism. Someone had to keep the water flowing. Someone had to repair the system when it failed. This was another form of specialized labor that could easily disappear from our view. The finished fountain looks effortless. The work behind it is not. Water itself created many occupations. In towns, people had to obtain drinking water from wells, rivers, springs, or other sources. Carriers could transport water. Households could rely on servants to fetch it. Water was heavy. 1 gallon weighs several kilograms. Carrying it repeatedly was tiring work. Imagine a servant walking toward a well in the early morning. The bucket is empty. The path is damp. She reaches the well. The bucket descends. There is a splash far below. Then the rope becomes heavier as the bucket is raised. The water is lifted, carried back, and poured into a household container. Then the journey begins again. There is something almost meditative about the repetition. Down, up 'em, carry, pour, return, again. Modern plumbing has hidden this labor almost completely. But in Tudor England, water could require daily physical effort. This was especially important in large households. Many people needed water for drinking, cooking, cleaning, washing, animals, gardens, fires. The simple act of turning a tap is the final stage of a long history of human attempts to move water. And in Tudor England, people were still doing much of that movement themselves. Now imagine the royal kitchen. It is becoming busy again. Large pots are heating. Knives move across wooden boards. Servants carry ingredients. Someone is grinding something with a mortar and pestle. Another person checks a fire. The smell of bread and herbs begins to fill the air. Among the people working here were those who specialized in preparing sweet foods. The Tudor elite had a strong appreciation for sugar and other expensive ingredients. Sugar was not an ordinary everyday commodity for most people. It was imported and costly. It therefore appeared particularly in elite cooking, medicine, and decorative food. A person who worked with sugar could have a surprisingly specialized role. Sugar could be used to create preserves, sweets, decorative pieces, and other preparations. Imagine a Tudor kitchen worker handling sugar. The ingredient is precious. It must not be wasted. The cook carefully measures it. Heat is applied. The mixture changes. The smell becomes sweeter. The final product may be served at a feast. Guests see the finished result. They do not see the hours of preparation. They see sweetness. The worker sees labor. And this was part of the Tudor relationship with food. Food was nourishment. But at court, it could also be performance. A feast could demonstrate wealth. A table filled with expensive ingredients showed that the household could afford them. Rare spices, imported fruits, sugar, fine wines, and elaborate dishes could all communicate status. The people preparing such meals therefore had to understand more than basic cooking. They needed to know presentation, timing, organization, and sometimes decoration. Food itself could become a form of art. But there was another strange profession connected with taste. The royal food taster. The idea is often exaggerated in popular stories, but food tasting was part of the broader world of royal household service and concerns about poisoning. A powerful person could face real political danger. Food and drink were therefore not treated casually in elite households. People responsible for serving meals had duties concerning trust and safety. Imagine a meal being prepared for a powerful Tudor figure. The kitchen is busy. The dishes are ready. Servants arrange them carefully. The food moves toward the dining room. Behind the ceremony is an awareness that the royal household must control what reaches the table. This does not mean that every royal meal involved a dramatic poison test. Daily life was not a constant scene of suspicion, but concerns about food, service, and trust were real. The royal household depended upon people whose reliability mattered. And this brings us to one of the most interesting groups of Tudor workers. Those who handled royal secrets. A messenger carrying a letter could know something important. A servant entering a private room could overhear a conversation. A person working in the wardrobe might see clothing prepared for a secret journey. A clerk might copy a sensitive document. A household servant might hear rumors before the public did. The closer a worker was to the center of power, the more likely he was to encounter information. This made certain servants valuable. Not because they were powerful themselves, but because they were trusted. Imagine carrying a sealed letter through a palace corridor. You know it is important. You do not know everything inside, but you understand that it belongs to someone powerful. You walk quietly. The seal remains unbroken. You deliver it. Your job is finished. In a modern world, information can travel instantly. In Tudor England, physical possession of information was itself a form of power. The messenger carried the secret. The scribe copied it. The servant delivered it. The recipient read it. The information moved through human hands. This made ordinary workers part of the machinery of government, and some of them traveled great distances. The Tudor court was not always stationary. Royal progress was an important feature of Tudor life. The monarch and household could travel between residences. This required enormous preparation. Food had to be arranged, accommodation had to be prepared, animals had to be moved, supplies had to follow. Servants had to travel, roads had to be navigated. The royal household became a moving city. Imagine seeing it approach. First come riders, then carts, then horses, then servants, then more vehicles. The road becomes crowded. Dust rises in dry weather. Mud splashes in wet weather. People living along the route may gather to watch. The royal procession passes, and behind the visible spectacle are countless workers, drivers, grooms, cooks, porters, messengers, clerks, laundry workers, wardrobe staff, people responsible for tents and furniture, people responsible for food, people responsible for horses. The king or queen may appear briefly, but the household continues behind them. This makes the royal servant one of the most interesting figures in Tudor England. A person could spend years traveling from one residence to another. The work was not simply serving food or cleaning rooms. It could mean living on the road, sleeping in unfamiliar places, managing changing conditions, carrying supplies, following instructions, and maintaining the appearance of order even when the entire household was moving. For some servants, this was a highly respected career. For others, it was physically demanding. But all were part of the same enormous system. Now let us leave the palace for a while. The countryside is quieter. Fields stretch into the distance. The morning mist slowly lifts. Sheep move across pasture. Farm workers are already active. The rural economy depended heavily on agriculture. Yet farming itself contained many specialized occupations. One of the strangest was the shepherd. At first glance, shepherding does not seem unusual. But imagine living much of your life among animals, often away from the main village. Your days are shaped by weather, rain, wind, cold, heat, fog. The health of the flock depends partly upon your attention. A sheep can become separated. An animal can become injured. A lamb can be born in difficult conditions. A predator can threaten the flock. The shepherd must watch. The work can be lonely. Imagine standing on a hillside as clouds move slowly overhead. The sheep graze quietly. Grass moves in the wind. You hear the occasional call of a bird. There is no traffic, no machinery, only animals and weather. The occupation might look peaceful, and sometimes it probably was, but it also demanded responsibility. A shepherd could not simply fall asleep whenever he wished. The animals still needed watching. This is one reason why historical work can be difficult to understand from a modern perspective. We often associate strange jobs with bizarre duties, but sometimes the strange pures is the lifestyle itself. A job could determine where you lived, when you slept, what weather you experienced, who you spent your time with, what dangers you faced, and how isolated you were. This was also true for people who worked as charcoal burners. Charcoal was an important fuel. It could be used in metalworking and other industries. Making charcoal required wood to be heated under controlled conditions with limited oxygen. The process could take place in woodland areas. The charcoal burner might spend long periods near the burning wood. The work produced smoke. The worker had to monitor the process carefully. Too much air could cause the wood to burn rather than turn into charcoal. Too little control could ruin the result. Imagine standing in a forest. The trees are tall around you. The ground is covered with leaves. But nearby, smoke rises slowly from a carefully constructed pile. The air smells of wood. Your clothing begins to absorb the smoke. You check the structure. You watch. You wait. Hours pass. Perhaps days. The job requires patience. The finished charcoal may look simple, black, light, fragile, but it took time and skill to produce, and it helped power other industries: the blacksmith, the metalworker, the forge. Again, one occupation supports another. A worker in the forest helps a worker in the town. The town worker produces tools for the farmer. The farmer produces food for the household. The household supports servants. The entire system is connected, and this connection is one of the quiet themes running through Tudor England. No occupation exists entirely alone. Even the strangest job is part of a larger chain. Now, think about salt. Salt was valuable because it helped preserve food. Before modern refrigeration, preservation was a constant challenge. Meat and fish could spoil. Salt helped slow that process. People therefore worked in trades connected with salt production, transport, and sale. In areas where salt could be produced naturally or through evaporation, workers gathered and processed it. Imagine standing near a coastal salt-making area. The air smells of seawater. Shallow pools or pans reflect the sky. Water slowly evaporates. Salt crystals remain. The work depends upon weather. Sunlight helps. Rain interrupts. Wind changes the process. The finished salt can be gathered and transported. Again, something that seems ordinary on a modern kitchen table once represented significant labor. A pinch of salt was the end of a long journey. The same was true of sugar. The same was true of pepper. The same was true of spices. The Tudor kitchen contained products that had traveled across oceans and continents. Spices such as pepper, cloves, cinnamons, and nutmeg were imported through long-distance trade networks. The people who handled these goods were part of an expanding commercial world. Merchants negotiated. Sailors traveled. Porters carried. Shipbuilders constructed vessels. Dock workers loaded cargo. Customs officials inspected goods. Accountants recorded transactions. The strange jobs of Tudor England were therefore not limited to palaces. They existed because England was connected to a wider world, and the port could be one of the busiest places to witness this. Imagine approaching a Tudor harbor. The smell reaches you first. Salt water, tar, wood, fish, smoke, wet rope. Ships sit in the water. Men carry cargo. Barrels are rolled. Crates are moved. Ropes creak. Sails flap in the wind. A ship has arrived. Its cargo must be unloaded. Someone has to check the goods. Someone has to record them. Someone has to collect duties or taxes where required. Someone has to move everything into storage. The harbor is a world of occupations. One particularly important group were the lightermen and other boat workers who moved goods through waterways and along rivers. Water transport could be easier than moving heavy cargo over poor roads. A boat could carry a large load, but it still required human labor. Someone had to steer. Someone had to load. Someone had to unload. Someone had to maintain the vessel. The river, therefore, became a workplace. Imagine a small boat moving slowly through dark water. The surface reflects the pale morning sky. The oar enters. Pulls. Leaves a small trail. The boat moves toward the harbor. Inside are goods that will soon appear in shops. The journey seems peaceful, but the work is physical, and the river itself can be dangerous. Currents, weather, collisions, navigation problems. A moment of carelessness could create serious trouble. Yet people depended upon these waterways. London, in particular, was deeply connected to the River Thames. The river was not simply scenery. It was a working highway. People traveled on it. Goods moved along it. Fish were caught from it. Ships arrived through it, and workers built their livelihoods around it. Some of those jobs would sound unusual to us. Watermen, fishermen, boatmen, dock workers, river pilots. They knew the water intimately. They recognized changing tides. They understood local hazards. They knew where a vessel could pass safely. Their knowledge was practical and often passed through experience. Imagine a waterman watching the river. The tide is changing. The wind is shifting. He knows what that means. Another person may see only water. He sees currents, depth, movement, risk. This kind of knowledge is easy to underestimate because it does not always appear in written records. But it was essential. And the same can be said of many Tudor occupations. The people who knew how to perform them carried knowledge that could not simply be downloaded from a book. They learned by watching, doing, failing, trying again, being corrected, then eventually teaching someone else. This was the world of apprenticeship. A young person could enter a trade and spend years learning. The master taught the apprentice. The apprentice worked. Over time, skill developed. Some occupations were organized through guilds. Guilds could regulate training, standards, and professional life. They created communities around particular trades. A young apprentice might therefore enter not just a job, but a whole social world. Imagine being 14 or 15 years old and entering a workshop. You do not yet know the trade. You watch. You carry materials. You clean tools. You make mistakes. The master corrects you. Slowly, your hands learn. The work becomes familiar. Years later, you may become skilled yourself. Perhaps you open your own shop. Perhaps you remain in someone else's employment. Perhaps you pass the knowledge to another young apprentice. This is how occupations survived across generations. And some occupations survived for centuries before finally disappearing. The Tudor period therefore stands at an interesting point in history. Old traditions remained powerful. But change was already happening. Printing was spreading. International trade was expanding. Urban populations were changing. Religious life was being transformed. Royal government was becoming more organized. New technologies were appearing, and occupations adapted. Some became more specialized. Others slowly disappeared. As evening approaches again, the market begins to quiet. The river reflects the fading light. The ships become dark shapes against the water. The smell of smoke drifts from houses. A bell sounds. People begin to return home. Workers carry the last loads of the day. The harbor grows calmer. But inside the palace, work continues. A royal servant checks clothing for tomorrow. A groom prepares the horses. A gardener finishes the day's work. A clerk writes by candlelight. A watchman prepares for the night. And somewhere in a small workshop, a craftsman closes his tools away. The Tudor world is settling. Yet tomorrow will bring another day of work. Another day of strange occupations. Another day in which people perform tasks that seem almost invisible until we stop and look carefully. And perhaps the strangest thing of all is not that Tudor England had unusual jobs. It is that every society does. Our own world has occupations that future historians may find equally mysterious. They may wonder why we spent hours managing machines, maintaining digital systems, answering messages, organizing information, and performing tasks that seem perfectly ordinary to us. To a Tudor person, our world would be almost unimaginable, and to us, theirs can feel equally distant. But beneath all of these differences is something familiar. People worked because they needed food. They worked because they needed shelter. They worked because families depended upon them. They worked because society required their skills. And sometimes, they worked simply because someone had to do the job. The night has returned. You walk slowly along a quiet Tudor lane. The stones are damp. A thin mist lies close to the ground. A candle flickers behind a wooden window. You can hear the faint sound of a fire. Somewhere farther away, a dog barks once, then silence. The palace is settling into darkness. The fields are quiet. The river continues moving. The workers who began before sunrise are finally resting. But one occupation remains awake: the night watch. And as you continue through the darkness, you begin to wonder what the watchman sees when almost everyone else is asleep. Because the next part of our journey will take us deeper into the night, toward the people who worked when Tudor England's streets had gone almost completely silent. And there, among the shadows, we will discover some of the strangest responsibilities of all. The night has settled gently over Tudor England. The streets that were crowded only a few hours ago have become quiet. A few windows still glow with candlelight. The fires inside houses have been reduced to warm embers. The river moves through the darkness, carrying the faint sounds of water against wood. You find yourself walking slowly beneath the shadow of a church tower. Above you, the bells are silent for the moment. Below, the stones are damp beneath your feet. Most people are asleep, but Tudor England has never been a place where everyone sleeps at once. There are always people working. Someone must watch the streets. Someone must care for the animals. Someone must tend the fires. Someone must guard valuable buildings. Someone must carry messages. And somewhere in the darkness, someone is performing a job that exists almost entirely because other people are sleeping. The night watchman. His work is simple in description. He watches. But watching through an entire night is not as easy as it sounds. Imagine standing outside while the temperature slowly falls. The streets are dark. Your clothing does little to protect you from the damp air. You listen carefully. A door closes. Footsteps approach, then disappear. A horse moves inside a stable. The wind passes between the buildings. There is no bright electric light to illuminate every corner. The darkness is real. It changes how the city feels. The watchman must remain alert. He may be expected to notice fires, disturbances, suspicious activity, or other problems. His work is partly about preventing trouble, but prevention is difficult to measure. If nothing happens, there is no dramatic evidence that the watchman succeeded. He simply continues walking, step by step, street by street, hour after hour, and perhaps this is why the occupation has such a quiet quality. The watchman is important precisely because most people do not notice him. His work exists in the background, like so much of Tudor life. Now imagine the same street during the day. Merchants call to customers. Children move between houses. Carts pass. Animals make noise. People talk. The street feels alive. At night, the same place becomes almost unfamiliar. The buildings seem taller, the shadows deeper. Every sound seems clearer. The watchman knows this version of the city. He knows which doors should be closed. He knows which buildings are usually quiet. He knows the normal sounds of the neighborhood. That knowledge can make an ordinary noise meaningful. A sudden shout, the smell of smoke, the sound of breaking wood, a horse behaving strangely. The watchman pays attention. And in a world where fire could spread rapidly through closely built neighborhoods, paying attention mattered. Fire was one of the great dangers of Tudor towns. Many buildings contained timber. Cooking depended on flames. Candles provided light. Heating depended on fireplaces. People stored flammable materials. A small fire could become a serious threat. This created another occupation connected with fire. People whose work involved carrying fuel, tending fires, or responding to emergencies. Some communities developed organized systems for dealing with fires, although these were nothing like modern fire departments. There were no engines racing through the streets, no pressurized hydrants, no protective breathing equipment. People depended upon buckets, water sources, cooperation, and local organization. Imagine a shout breaking the silence. Fire. The word travels from house to house. People wake, doors open, voices rise, buckets appear, water is carried. The calm night disappears. Then, after the danger passes, the town slowly becomes quiet again. The workers return to their ordinary duties. The next morning, people examine the damage. Someone repairs a wall. Someone replaces a door. Someone clears debris. Someone begins again. This was the rhythm of life in a world where disasters could become personal very quickly. But not all unusual Tudor occupations were connected with danger. Some were connected with comfort. Consider the person who prepared royal baths. Bathing in Tudor England did exist, although bathing habits varied greatly according to time, place, wealth, and personal preference. People washed themselves. They washed clothing. They used basins. They used water heated over fires. We should be careful not to imagine that everyone in Tudor England simply avoided bathing. The reality was more complicated. Personal cleanliness was valued, but the methods were very different from those available today. A wealthy household could have servants responsible for preparing water. Imagine a servant carrying buckets. The water is heavy. It must be heated. The fire must be maintained. The bath must be prepared. Everything requires time. What takes minutes in a modern bathroom could become a considerable household task. And once again, comfort depended upon labor. Someone else carried the water. Someone else heated it. Someone else cleaned afterward. The person enjoying the bath experienced comfort. The worker experienced effort. This relationship appears everywhere in Tudor society. The more comfortable the household, the more labor could be hidden behind that comfort. Now imagine a royal bedroom. The bed has been prepared. Fresh linen has been arranged. A fire provides warmth. Clothing is ready. Water has been brought. A servant stands nearby. The monarch can begin the day without performing many of the tasks that ordinary people must perform themselves. That is part of what made royal life different. Not simply wealth, but the number of people whose labor could be placed between the monarch and ordinary inconvenience. And this leads us back to one of the strangest royal positions of all, the groom of the stool. We encountered this occupation earlier, but now we can understand it more clearly. The job was connected with the monarch's private needs, particularly the use of the privy. To modern ears, it sounds almost absurd that such a position could exist within the royal household. But in Tudor England, intimate service could also create trust. A servant who regularly assisted the king in private moments could become someone the monarch knew personally. Access mattered. Information mattered. Trust mattered. The position, therefore, could become politically significant. The title sounds humorous today. The reality was more complicated. It reminds us that history does not always organize status according to modern ideas. A person can perform an apparently humble task and still occupy an important place within a powerful institution. And that is one of the most useful lessons from the strange jobs of Tudor England. Work and status did not always fit together in obvious ways. A person could have an unpleasant occupation and still be necessary. A person could have a prestigious position and still perform routine physical tasks. A person could serve a king without being powerful. A person could work in a palace without ever appearing in a famous portrait. The Tudor world was full of these contradictions. Now let us return to the streets. Morning is approaching. The darkness is becoming softer. The horizon is beginning to brighten. The watchman has nearly completed his shift. Soon other workers will appear. The baker, the milk seller, the market worker, the stable hand, the messenger, the porter, the craftsman, the servant. The people who worked through the night will begin to disappear into their homes or quarters. The people who work during the day will take their place. This exchange is almost invisible. One world ends, another begins, and the city continues. As the morning slowly arrives, smoke begins to rise from chimneys. The first sounds of cooking drift through the streets. A horse pulls a cart. Someone opens a shop. The bells begin again. The Tudor day has returned. But before we leave this world, there are still a few unusual occupations worth remembering. One of them was the royal falconer. We have already seen how important birds of prey could be to the Tudor elite. But imagine the amount of care involved. A falcon was not simply kept in a cage. It required training and attention. The falconer needed to understand its behavior. Food had to be managed carefully. The bird's physical condition mattered. Its feathers had to remain healthy. The relationship between bird and human depended upon repeated interaction. A trained bird represented many hours of work. The nobleman might simply see the final moment. The falcon rises, it circles, it follows the command. But the falconer sees everything that came before: the early mornings, the feeding, the training, the waiting, the mistakes, the repetition. And perhaps there is something peaceful about this work, a human being standing quietly with a bird. The countryside stretching around them, the wind moving through the grass, the bird watching the horizon. No crowd, no palace ceremony, just patience. Another unusual occupation was connected with bees. Beekeeping was important because bees provided honey and beeswax. Honey could be used as food and in other preparations. Beeswax was valuable for candles and other purposes. Someone, therefore, had to care for bees. The work required knowledge of seasons and behavior. Imagine approaching a hive on a warm morning. You hear the low hum before you see the bees. The sound is steady, almost like a distant vibration. The air smells faintly of flowers and warm earth. The beekeeper works carefully. A sudden, careless movement could provoke the insects. The hive must be managed. Honey must be collected. The colony must survive. Again, the job may seem simple from a distance, but it depends upon knowledge. And knowledge was one of the most valuable forms of labor in the Tudor world. People learned how to read animals, how to read weather, how to read soil, how to read tides, how to read machinery, how to read people, how to prepare food, how to repair clothing, how to manage households. These skills rarely appear in grand histories, but they made daily life possible. There was also the occupation of the miller. A miller worked with grain, often using a watermill or windmill depending upon location and circumstances. The mill transformed grain into flour. The machinery could be large and complicated. The miller had to understand how the system worked. Water had to flow correctly where water power was used. Gears had to move. Millstones had to remain in proper condition. Grain had to be processed. Flour had to be handled. The work could be noisy. Imagine standing inside a working mill. The sound is constant. Wood moves. Stone turns. Water rushes nearby. The air contains fine particles of grain. The machinery seems almost alive, but it is not automatic. The miller must understand every part. A problem with one component can affect the entire process. And without the miller, grain cannot easily become the flour needed for bread. The miller therefore occupies a central place in the food system. But there is another occupation even closer to the final stage: the baker. Bakers worked through the night or early morning so that bread could be ready when customers arrived. Imagine entering a bakery before sunrise. The air is warm. The smell is rich. Fresh bread is being removed from the oven. Outside, the street is still cool. Inside, work has already been going for hours. The baker kneads, shapes, waits, bakes, repeats. For ordinary people, bread was a central part of the diet. The baker therefore performed an essential service, and perhaps there is something comforting about this image. While most people sleep, someone is preparing bread for the morning. The first light has not yet appeared, but the smell of food already fills the street. This is the kind of small detail that brings history close. Not the names of kings, not battles, not political speeches, just bread, warm air, a tired worker, a dark street, and morning approaching. The Tudor world was full of such moments. Now think about another kind of worker, the chimney sweep. As houses used fireplaces for heating and cooking, chimneys needed cleaning. Soot could accumulate. Chimney maintenance was therefore important. The occupation became especially associated with small workers and apprentices in later periods. But we should be cautious about projecting later chimney sweeping practices backward into the Tudor period, exactly as they became known in later centuries. What we can say is that maintaining fireplaces and chimneys was a practical necessity. Smoke had to escape, soot had to be managed, fireplaces had to remain usable, and household workers had to deal with the mess created by constant burning. This brings us back to the importance of fire. Fire warmed the house. Fire cooked food. Fire provided light. Fire powered certain crafts. But fire also created smoke, soot, ash, and danger. One element of Tudor life could therefore produce several occupations. A single hearth could require fuel. Someone had to carry the fuel. Someone had to light it. Someone had to maintain it. Someone had to remove the ash. Someone had to keep the chimney functioning. The fire itself was simple. The labor around it was not. And this is perhaps the clearest way to understand the strange jobs of Tudor England. Look at any ordinary object: a candle, a loaf of bread, a shirt, a horse, a book, a wooden door, a cup of ale, a bed, a fireplace. Behind every object is a chain of workers. The Tudor world was not powered by electricity. It was powered by people, their muscles, their patience, their memory, their skill, their knowledge, their willingness to repeat the same task every day. This is why some occupations seem so strange to us. We have forgotten the work they performed. Modern life hides much of the labor behind systems. Water arrives through pipes. Food arrives through stores. Clothing arrives ready-made. Light comes from a switch. Information travels through networks. Waste disappears through drains. Heating happens through hidden systems. But in Tudor England, many of these processes were visible. People saw the worker carrying water. They saw the baker making bread. They heard the blacksmith hammering iron. They smelled the smoke. They watched the porter carry goods. They heard the bells. They saw horses being cared for. Daily life was more directly connected to physical labor. And perhaps this is why the strangest jobs can teach us something about ordinary life. The strange is often simply the familiar viewed from another century. Now the sun is rising. The rooftops catch the first pale light. The streets begin to fill. The watchman finally leaves his post. The baker is opening his doors. The market workers are preparing their stalls. The palace servants are already moving. The gardens are wet with morning dew. The horses are being fed. The church bell rings. Tudor England begins again. And if you look carefully, you can see all the occupations we have followed existing at the same time. The gardener, the falconer, the ostler, the porter, the miller, the baker, the laundress, the scribe, the clockmaker, the apothecary, the blacksmith, the watchman, the royal servant, the keeper of animals, the people who handled water, the people who maintained fires, the people who cleaned, the people who carried, the people who repaired, the people who prepared. None of them worked alone. They were part of an enormous network. A kingdom was not maintained only by rulers. It was maintained by workers. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is that many of these workers were never famous. Their names did not become famous because their work was ordinary. But ordinary work is exactly what keeps a society alive. A king may sign a document, but someone made the ink. Someone prepared the parchment. Someone carried the document. Someone stored it. Someone preserved it. A nobleman may ride a beautiful horse, but someone fed it. Someone groomed it. Someone cleaned its stable. Someone repaired its saddle. Someone cared for its hooves. A wealthy family may sleep beneath fine linen, but someone spun the fibers. Someone wove the cloth. Someone stitched it. Someone washed it. Someone carried it. The final comfort hides the labor behind it. And so, as we leave Tudor England, perhaps we should not remember only the strangest titles. We should remember the people. People waking before sunrise. People working beside fires. People standing in cold water. People walking through dark streets. People carrying heavy loads. People sitting quietly with needles. People writing carefully with quills. People watching animals. People listening for danger. People tending gardens. People preparing food. People keeping palaces running. Their world was not easy, but it was their world. They understood its rhythms. They knew the smell of their streets. They knew the sound of their bells. They knew how the weather changed the roads. They knew how long bread needed to bake. They knew how a horse behaved when it was tired. They knew how fabric felt when it was wet. They knew how much wood a fire needed. They knew which streets became muddy after rain. They carried knowledge that rarely made it into history books. And when we travel quietly through their lives, the Tudor period begins to feel less like a distant painting and more like a living place. Imagine standing once more in the middle of a Tudor street. The morning is cool. The sun has only just risen. A baker carries warm bread. A porter walks past with a heavy load. A horse pulls a cart. A church bell sounds. A servant hurries toward a great house. Somewhere nearby, a craftsman begins work. The city is waking. You pause for a moment. You listen. And beneath all the noise, you can almost hear the rhythm of thousands of hands. Working, repairing, carrying, cleaning, preparing, waiting. The great events of Tudor history will continue. Kings will rise. Queens will rule. Religious changes will reshape communities. Wars will be fought. Palaces will be built and altered. New ideas will spread. Old traditions will disappear. But beneath those great events, the workers will continue. The baker will still make bread. The farmer will still tend the fields. The groom will still care for the horse. The laundress will still wash the linen. the watchman will still walk through the night. And the person with the strangest job of all may still be somewhere nearby, quietly doing work that nobody will remember centuries later. The day grows brighter. The streets become busier. The smell of fresh bread mixes with smoke and damp earth. The sound of conversation grows. Another Tudor day has begun, and slowly, the strange occupations that once seemed so distant begin to feel familiar, because beneath every unusual job was a very ordinary reason. Someone needed something. Someone had to provide it. And someone learned how. That is how occupations begin. That is how they survive. And that is how they eventually disappear. A world changes. Its needs change. Its technology changes. Its habits change. And the jobs change with them. Perhaps centuries from now, people will look back at our own occupations with the same quiet curiosity. They may wonder why we spent our days doing things that seemed completely normal to us. They may wonder what our workplaces smelled like, what sounds filled our streets, what tools we used, what tasks we considered important. They may find some of our jobs strange. And perhaps that is the gentle lesson Tudor England leaves behind. Every age has its ordinary people. Every age depends upon invisible work. And every age eventually forgets many of the hands that made it possible. So tonight, as our journey through Tudor England comes to an end, imagine the last light of evening settling over the old rooftops. The market is quiet again. The river moves slowly beneath the darkening sky. The palace windows begin to glow. A gardener has gone home. A baker has finished another day. The horses are resting. The church bells have become distant. The watchman is preparing to begin his night. Inside a small house, someone closes a wooden shutter. A candle burns beside a bed. The flame moves gently in the evening air. Outside, the Tudor streets grow quiet, and for a moment, nothing seems to change. But tomorrow, the work will begin again. Someone will wake before sunrise. Someone will light a fire. Someone will carry water. Someone will prepare bread. Someone will open the palace doors. Someone will care for the horses. Someone will clean the rooms. Someone will write a letter. Someone will ring a bell. Someone will walk through the darkness. And somewhere, perhaps in a quiet corner of the Tudor world, someone will begin one of those wonderfully strange jobs that made this old society work. The centuries will pass. The buildings will change. The occupations will disappear. But the memory of their labor remains. Not always in names, not always in portraits. Sometimes only in a record. Sometimes only in an old building. Sometimes in an object that survived. And sometimes simply in the knowledge that someone, long ago, had to do the work. The night becomes peaceful. The final candle burns lower. The streets are almost silent. You find yourself standing once more beneath the old Tudor sky. The air is cool. The stones beneath your feet hold the day's warmth. A faint breeze moves through the narrow street. Then the candle disappears behind a shutter. The town settles. The workers rest. And Tudor England, for a little while, sleeps.